This story begins with a cruel sentence at a rich country club. She's just a nurse. Victoria said it makes Shelby look poor, invisible and unworthy of the room. But the man funding the entire wedding suddenly froze. He remembered a voice in the rain, a pair of steady hands, and a nurse who refused to let die. Minutes later, he took the microscope to write her lies and exposed every Victoria heroism. By the end of the night, the bride was forgotten. By the end of the night, and Shelby's hidden arrow, and the nurse became unforgettable.
Welcome to Echo. Tale's secrets linger here. And memories bite my stepsister. She sees my nursing job as a smudge on her perfect life. 100 guests, champagne everywhere. My dad let out a sharp, genuine laugh that cut through the noise. I stood there in a plain dress while socialites in silk looked right through me, but they had no clue that man at the head table, the groom's father footing, the bill. I held his heart in my hands on a highway 3 years ago. And he was about to remember before I continue. If this story hits home, hit like and subscribe. Tell me where you are watching from. I am Sarah 29, a trauma nurse. This is how my sister-esque cruelty became her biggest regret. Let's head back 3 weeks before the wedding, when Victoria's invite hit my mailbox. It arrived on a Tuesday, buried under a pile of bills. Cream paper, gold monograms, V and J, Victoria and James. I traced the gold lettering. My hands still smelled like the emergency room. They misspelled my name, Shelley. They always do, no +1. I stared at the envelope like a legal summons because that is exactly what it was. Victoria did not want me there. She wanted me tracked growing up in my father's house. I was just furniture. Robert married Diane when I was 9. Victoria was 12. The family blueprint changed overnight. Victoria got the canopy bed and portrait sessions. My space? A cold study with a flickering light. Her photos lined the halls. Mine stayed hidden in a drawer. Diane introduced Victoria as our daughter. I was just Robert's kid from before my dad. He let it slide every time. I called him Sundays like a robot. He would talk for a minute, then hang up, never calling back. Months passed in silence. When that invite arrived, misspelled and solitary, I almost tossed it. Almost. Then my phone rang. Victoria wants you there, my father said, his voice dripping with the fake warmth he saved. For an audience, it would mean a lot. I knew better when he calls it is only for Victoria. I researched the Harringtons that night, sitting on my floor with medical textbooks for a desk. Richard Harrington, 63, a self-made mogul who built a real estate empire from scratch. The press calls him the king of unpretentious wealth. His son James was a corporate lawyer, polished and predictable. Victoria had dated him for 2 years, weaving a total fantasy about our family. I pieced it together from her Instagram. Photos of brunches I never saw, in clothes I never wore, Robert in a crisp blazer, Diane with her hair done, captions about family, being everything. The comments were endless praise, a curated life for a perfect image. I was never in a single shot. Robert managed a hardware store. Victoria told them he was a hardware executive. Diane was a caterer. Victoria upgraded her to a business owner. Everything in our family was a fresh coat of paint on rotting wood. I later learned from James that Victoria gave specific orders, keep her invisible. That word hit like a punch. Invisible, that had been my role for years. Here is the secret to being invisible at home. You become essential somewhere else. My shift at the trauma center started at 7. 19 hours later, I was still standing. That week, I worked 4 brutal shifts, handled 3 cardiac arrests, and saved a 60-year-old man who walked out days later with flowers. Nobody at the hospital cared who my sister was marrying. They only cared that my skills were sharp. My boss, a tough surgeon, even nominated me for an Excellence Award. I won. The plaque stayed in my locker. I never told my family. Once I mentioned the nomination to Victoria, and she just laughed. Do they give real awards to nurses? Diane giggled. Robert said nothing, so I kept my wins quiet. I let my work speak in patient charts and surgical reports. The biggest moment of my career happened 3 years back after a massive highway pileup during a storm. Cars were everywhere. I was driving home, exhausted, when I found the wreckage. The next 47 minutes changed everything, but let me get back to the wedding. The branch was at the Harrington estate, a massive stone colonial with perfect hedges. I parked my modest car between a Porsche and a Mercedes, sitting there for a moment to breathe. The house smelled of money and peonies. Victoria stood at the centre of the room, playing the perfect bride. I headed for the restroom and wandered down a hallway, finding Richard Harrington's study. The door was open. I did not mean to snoop, but the walls stopped me. Books, awards, and a desk with expensive scotch, but in the centre sat a photo. A man in a hospital bed, bruised and broken. A card beside it read, "To the angel on the highway," and a clipping from the paper local businessman survives crash thanks to off-duty nurse. I looked at the photo. The face was swollen and unrecognizable. 3 years of trauma patients blur together. I started to look. Then Richard Harrington walked in. "That is my second birthday," he said, nodding at the frame. "The day someone gave me my life back." I gave him a tight smile. "That is incredible." He looked at me for a long, intense second before Margaret called him away. Then Victoria appeared. "Stop bothering Mr. Harrington!" she hissed, grabbing my arm. She dragged me away before I could speak. The garden brunch was an exercise in lies. Victoria played the press secretary, polishing our family image for the guests. "My mother, Diane, ran a catering company." She lied. Diane beamed. Richard nodded, impressed. "My stepfather, Robert, is a hardware executive." Robert straightened his coat and gripped Richard's hand. Victoria then moved to the next group, skipping me entirely. I stood 3 feet away, drink in hand, ignored like furniture. Margaret Harrington leaned in. "Who was I?" Victoria's smile strained. "She is Shelby. She is just around." When asked about my work, Victoria cut in. "She is some hospital worker," I corrected her. "I am a registered trauma nurse at St. Luke's." Margaret looked intrigued, but Victoria grabbed her arm and steered her away. We were quickly shuffled aside as Victoria passed me with Diane. I caught a sharp command. "She talks too much. Handle it." Diane soon cornered me by the roses, flashing a smile that did not reach her eyes. She was polite, cold, and calculated, closing off the conversation like a door locking me out. She touched my arm. "We need to talk," she said. She pulled me to a dark garden bench. "Victoria is under pressure," she insisted, fake sympathy in her voice. "The wedding is her big moment. Just stay quiet and do not make it about you." I knew this script. I had been told the same thing when I was passed over for professional recognition. I was pushed aside at birthdays and graduation for their convenience. I was the variable they had to control. I told her I understood, but I did not back in my car. I called my friend Priya. I should not have come. Then I heard Victoria through an open window nearby. She was on the phone, painting a dark picture. She told someone I had emotional issues so people would not ask questions. I sat there in silence. Something inside me shifted. The drive home felt like an attempt to scrub those words off my skin. 2 days later, the truth was confirmed. James was on the patio talking to a groomsman named Tyler. They did not see me. James casually mentioned that Victoria's stepsister had personal issues and was kept at a distance. Victoria had not just sidelined me, she had completely reinvented my identity to everyone we knew. I was the tragic stepsister, someone they gently quarantined. I called my father immediately. Did he know she was spreading lies about my mental health? He sighed, the classic sound of being caught, and told me not to make a scene. He was wearing the clothes she picked, repeating the scripts she wrote. I finally realized he had not just watched me be erased, he had helped her do it. The rehearsal dinner was a display of excess, crystal expensive flowers, and endless luxury. I wore a simple navy dress from Target, and my mother's small pearl studs. That was all I had left of her. I found my name tag at the kitchen entrance, tucked away with the babysitter. Victoria was thorough. Guests in designer clothes flowed around me like water. Diane scanned me for 3 seconds, leaned into Victoria, and they both looked away. I saw Victoria whisper 2 words. "She is fine," meaning I was plain enough to be ignored. I sat through the meal, which cost more than I made in 3 days. Victoria took the stage, rented microphone in hand. She started the toasts, introducing everyone with polish and pride until she reached my table. She paused. The silence was scripted perfectly. "This is my stepsister, Shelby," she said with a dismissive smile. "Just a nurse. She made it sound like a failure rather than a career. My father laughed at the jab. Diane smirked. The room followed the bride's lead, laughing at me for a few painful seconds. I sat still, hands gripping my glass, but then I saw something. Richard Harrington was not laughing. He was watching me. He leaned toward Margaret, then toward James. I saw his lips move as he said he had seen me before. 30 minutes later, Victoria took the mic again to talk about family. She recounted a story about me banjaying a dog as a kid, then smirked. I guess she finally found her level. Diane looked enraptured. A woman from the guest list approached me, mocking my work as a nurse. "Do you just empty bedpans?" she chuckled. I looked her dead in the eye. "Actually, last Tuesday, I assisted in emergency heart surgery. We saved a man's life in the trauma bay." Her smirk vanished. She stammered and bolted. Chloe stepped in. "Stop boring people with work talk." I stayed silent. My silence usually did the heavy lifting. Across the hall, I saw Julian watching his bride, frowning the look of a man sensing trouble. Chloe cornered me later. Everything here was marble and expensive soap. She slammed the door cold. Her voice lost that fake charm. "It is my wedding tomorrow. You sit, you smile, keep quiet. Stay away from the Sturtling family. Don't talk." I caught her gaze in the mirror. "Why tell them I have mental health struggles?" She didn't flinch. I told them what they needed to hear. "You lied. I managed the image. You think they want a nurse and a teacher," she spat out. "Teacher like a disease. I am building a future. This day matters. Don't ruin it. You want me invisible? I want you to know your 3 words. The same words my family used for years." Chloe was just the first to say it aloud. The door creaked. Maya appeared. "Everything okay?" "Just sister stuff," Chloe said smoothly. She adjusted a diamond bracelet one I knew she borrowed from a client. Maya smiled and shut the doors like she was burying a secret. I stood in luxury that cost more than my rent, and I decided I was done being quiet. I left early. Nobody noticed. I sat in my beat-up car in the parking lot, hands shaking my keychain. A gift from my nursing team caught the light. I could just drive away, let her have her perfect day while I went back to my life. Nobody inside would miss me. That was the point of table 18. I called Dr. Alina Ross. She picked up. "They called you just a nurse." Her voice cut like a knife. "Sarah, you have saved more lives in 1 year than most do in a lifetime. Do not let them shrink you." I looked through the glass. The party went on. Then I saw Elias Sterling, standing alone, staring into the night, our eyes locked. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Clara Sterling. I got your contact from the list. Glad you are here. Elias was asking about you. I read it 3 times. Why? I wouldn't know until later, but that message told me to stay." I started the engine, then turned back toward the estate. Ever felt that pull? That moment where you decide it is worth the fight? If you have stayed when every instinct screamed to run, tell me below. What made you stay? And if this story has you hooked, hit subscribe. The turning point is almost here. The wedding was at the Sterling estate, 200 guests, rare flowers, a string orchestra. Chloe wore a gown that turned the lawn into a movie set. I arrived early because I couldn't trust myself to show up at all. Chloe intercepted me. "Why are you early? Stay out of the photos." She called me once for the group shot. The photographer tucked me in the back. I saw the photo later. I was cropped out of every version she posted. At the reception, I found my seat. Table 22, way back. The tablecloth was wrinkled, the centerpiece neglected. I was pushed into the shadows, but then Elias Sterling appeared. He worked the room, shaking hands until he reached my table. He didn't reach for my hand. He pulled out a chair and sat. "You know, 3 years ago, I almost died on the highway. A truck hit me head-on. I was trapped for an hour. One person kept me awake." She talked about the rain and the wreckage so I would not fade out. The medic said without her, "I would not be at this wedding. My heart hammered 3 years. So many faces." He looked at me. "I am sorry, you remind me of someone." Someone called his name, and he stood, squeezed my shoulder and left. Chloe gave a speech that was a total act. She stood on the dance floor, thanking everyone who made her feel important. Maya, my rock. Robert, my hero, the father I always wanted. She thanked the bridesmaids, her boss, the groomsmen, the Sterling family, the people she always wanted. She thanked the florist, the caterer, even the waitstaff by name. She did not say mine, not once. 200 people clapped. Robert looked proud. No one noticed the omission, because no one expected me there. I sat at my pathetic table with empty chairs and listened to my sister thank everyone in her orbit but me. Julian leaned toward Chloe afterward. You didn't mention Sarah. Chloe touched his cheek. She prefers it that way. Trust me. I went to the restroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection. My eyes were dry, my face stone cold. Mom would have said my name first. The door opened. Clara Sterling walked in. She saw me. I noticed you weren't mentioned, she said softly. You okay? I am used to it. Clara held my gaze. No one should be used to that. I found my father on the patio, drinking expensive scotch with someone else's money, Dad. He turned, a flash of discomfort. You didn't say my name, Robert exhaled. Sarah, don't do this. It is closed. When is it mine, Dad? You are being dramatic. That is exactly what Chloe says about he stopped. About what? That I am unstable? That I have issues? You told them that too, didn't you? He looked away, focusing on anything but me. That was his answer. It was always his answer. The silence, the retreat into a place where he didn't have to account for the daughter. He pushed away 20 years ago. I am done, I said. He flinched, not with the wedding. Done waiting for you to see me. I walked inside. He didn't follow. He just stayed, drinking his borrowed scotch, and let me go. The real pain wasn't my sister erasing me. It was watching my father help her. I slipped into the ballroom and froze. Arthur Sterling stood at the bar, phone in hand, staring at a grainy news clipping. He looked up, saw me, and walked over. He stopped inches away, his phone screen still lit. I recognized the headline, Local Executive Survives Horrific Highway Crash. The same story he kept framed in his office. Excuse me, he said. His voice was fragile like glass. Can I ask you something? Where did you work 3 years ago? I told him Mercy General, the emergency room. It wasn't a question. Were you on the highway that night? November 14th? There it was. The date, the road, the trauma that lived in my shoulders for 3 years. The way I still flinch at screeching tires. I nodded, my voice cracked. Arthur stood perfectly still. His eyes filled with tears, slow and steady. It is you, he whispered. Arthur, you held my head for 47 minutes in the rain. You talked so I wouldn't fade away. You told me about your mother's pearl earrings so I would stay focused while I could not feel my legs. My hand went to my ear. My mother's pearl stud, the one I wore that night, the one I described to a bleeding stranger to keep him anchored while help was miles off. Arthur looked at the earring, his jaw tightened. It is you! Then Victoria's voice cut through the air. Attention everyone, time for the father-daughter dance. Arthur had to leave, but he gripped my hand. Don't go. I have something to say. For 3 years, he had looked for me while I sat at table 18 in his son's, his family's wedding. The song started. Victoria and Robert swayed under fairy lights. The room sighed on cue. Victoria smiled for the cameras. It was a perfect image, always a perfect image, with Victoria. I watched Arthur vanish through a side door. He was gone 12 minutes. I counted. What I found out later was this. He walked to the garden, called the hospital, and reached the emergency room. Dr. Ellen Marsh answered. I need records for a trauma nurse, Sarah, he said. She worked the multi-vehicle crash 3 years ago. The patient was Arthur Sterling. There was a pause. Then Ellen spoke. Sarah was the lead nurse. She stabilized you for nearly an hour before the medics arrived. She even earned a formal hospital commendation. She saved your life, sir. Can you email that letter? I can send it now. 3 minutes later, Arthur's phone buzzed. The email from the nursing chief arrived with the official edition attached. It was precise and clinical. Sarah, a registered nurse, showed extraordinary poise under pressure, performing manual stabilization in severe weather. Arthur read it twice, closed the email, and called his wife. I need the mic after the toasts, he said. I have an announcement. What kind? The kind this family needs. I returned to table 18. The floor was packed. Victoria was glowing, spinning with groomsmen, the room orbiting her. A photographer captured every move. I sat alone with a wilted centerpiece and my reflection in a butter knife. My pearl earrings glimmered in the dark. Then Margaret Sterling sat down beside me. No scene, no drama. She pulled up a chair at the worst table in the room, set her bag down and settled in. Her beige wrap looked simple, understated, and elegant. We sat in silence until she began. Arthur told me about the bridge collapse. I stared at her. He remembers everything. He talks about that medic every holiday. She folded her hands. You saved the most important person in my life, and you never asked for any credit. I didn't do it for fame, ma'am. I did it because I was there and I knew my job. I know, she said. That is exactly why you deserve it. A pause. The music slowed. What is he going to do? I asked. Margaret looked at me with a rare warmth, something like motherly concern. What he should have done years ago, she said, covering my hand with hers. I let her, for the first time. Someone sat with me because they wanted to. Margaret Sterling, a woman who had everything, chose my table. Respect isn't about the floor plan. It matters who sits at your table. What happened next still haunts me. Subscribe for the truth. The music stopped and the host stood. Friends. The father of the bride has a few words. 200 heads turned. Arthur took the stage like a man who spent years waiting for this moment. Sarah beamed. She leaned into her groom, hungry for praise. Arthur didn't smile. Most of you know, he began, his voice booming, that 3 years ago I survived a horrific wreck. A semi-truck crushed my car. My legs were pinned. The steering wheel shattered my chest. The room went silent. For 47 minutes before help arrived, one person kept me breathing. A complete stranger. She crawled into the wreckage, stabilized my neck, and talked me through the darkest hour of my life. He paused, scanning the crowd. Sarah's smile stiffened. I never found her, Arthur continued. The hospital kept her name private. I hired investigators. I started a foundation. For 3 years I called her, my guardian. He breathed out. Tonight I found her. Arthur looked toward table 18. The woman who saved my life is sitting right there. 200 pairs of eyes hit me. The girl in the plain dress. My name is Maya. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. You could hear ice clinking. Arthur's voice stayed steady. 20 minutes ago, the woman next to me on stage called Maya just a nurse. He turned to Sarah. Her face went pale. Let me tell you what that means, Arthur said, voice dropping low. It means kneeling in glass in the rain. It means holding a stranger's head for 47 minutes to prevent paralysis. It means discussing family history, the heirlooms she wears tonight to keep a dying man conscious. He held up his phone with an official letter. This is a formal medical commendation. It proves Maya was solely responsible for keeping me alive. Someone started clapping. Then another. A wave of applause rose until the entire tent was on their feet. Alina stood frozen. Arthur dropped his glass, staring at me like he should have known me. Julian turned to Alina. His voice cut the silence. You told me she was unstable. You lied. The applause died. Every eye locked on Alina. Julian stepped toward her. Did you tell the guests that Maya was mentally unfit? Alina's fingers grabbed her necklace, that nervous childhood habit when a lie was about to break. Julian, not now. Answer me. The tent felt like a courtroom, 200 witnesses, no objections. Alina tried to smile, but it looked twisted, the hollow reflex of a socialite. I just wanted this night to end. Beatrice Thorne rose from table 18. Her tone was lethal. Simple. You lied to our family about the woman who saved my husband's life. You faked a medical history to hide her in the back. Arthur shifted. Let us not react. Arthur cut him off, voice flat. Arthur, with respect, your daughter fabricated a story to manipulate my family. That is not an overreaction. That is a character flaw. Eleanor's eyes welled up. Tears spilled out, practiced and instant. Diane reached out, but Alina swatted her hand away, voice spiraling into a jagged mess. This is her fault, she hissed, pointing at me. She should have stayed invisible. A gasp rippled through the room. 200 people heard it. The staff, Julian, the Thorns, my own father. She should have stayed invisible. No one prompted that. No one scripted it, which made it the only honest thing, Alina said. All night, Arthur grabbed the mic. The room still buzzed. But he stood steady, a man who survived worse than a ruined wedding. "I never planned this," he admitted. His voice was gravelly, thick with emotion, but the timing felt right. He stood taller. "3 years ago, I founded the Thorn Emergency Grant, $200,000 every year for medics showing real grit." Whispers surged. "I spent 3 years hunting for the right person. I scoured the country and read dozens of resumes." He shook his head. She was sitting right here at table 18 in a $40 dress. He walked off the stage. The spotlight tracked him. The same light highlighting Elena's $10,000 gown now trailed a 60-year-old man toward the back. He stopped at my table and offered a hand. "Maya Vance, I am honored to name you our first scholarship recipient. It covers your advanced nursing training to keep saving lives." I stood. My legs were shaky, but my vision was clear. I took his hand. 200 people rose with me. A standing ovation echoed through the tent. Arthur leaned in, whispering for me alone, "Thank you for saving my life." Behind us, Elena stood on stage, forgotten, under a light that no longer belonged to her. Her party, her guests, but only my story would be remembered. I did not save him for fame. I did it for the job. But I cannot lie, it feels good to be seen. Julian grabbed Elena's arm and led her toward the terrace doors. He did not pull, he did not shout, but his grip was firm. And Elena followed because she had no script for a man she could not control. Through the glass we watched them. Elena crossed her arms. Julian ran his hands through his hair, pacing, the body language of a man recalibrating his entire life. Snippets of their argument drifted through the door. "You told my parents she was unstable." Julian snapped. "You had me believing my own wife, sister, was someone to pity. What else are you lying about? Everything I did was for us, Julian. For our image." "Our image? I married you because you were kind. My father nearly died. The woman who saved him was hidden in the back because of you. She is a nobody. She is the reason my father walked me down the aisle. Today she is somebody." Silence then, Julian quieter, but dead serious. "Here is the deal. You will apologize to Maya, tonight, in front of everyone you humiliated. And Monday morning we see a marriage counselor. You cannot be serious if I find one more lie. We are finished." Through the glass, I saw Elena's posture crumble. The perfect, arrogant arch of her spine softened into pure fear. For the first time, her armor was gone. I did not hunt for my father. He found me. I was on the far balcony, away from the noise, watching garden lights flicker like promises. The night air was biting, but I did not mind. At least the cold was real. "Maya," I turned. Arthur stood in the doorway, his cheap suit rumpled, his face a disaster. He looked like a man watching a building collapse, realizing he had been the one holding it up. "I did not know," he whispered. "About the accident, about the Thornies." "No," I said. "You did not, because you never asked. You never asked about my work. You never asked if I was hurt. You never asked anything. I thought I was keeping the peace. You were keeping Elena happy." "Those are not the same thing." He tried to talk, but the words died. Then he sobbed. My father, standing on a billionaire-esque balcony, crying like he just realized the fire started years ago. I did not hug him. I stayed put. "I do not hate you, Dad. I just stopped expecting you to be a father a long time ago. Can I fix this? I do not know, but crying at Elena's wedding is not the fix." He wiped his eyes. "Elena told me you wanted space." And I believed her because it was easy. 20 years of neglect summed up in one sentence. He had not been fooled. He had just chosen the easy path. "I do not need your tears, Dad. I need you to remember this when Elena asks you to ignore me again." He nodded. I walked inside. Elena returned 15 minutes later. Her makeup was touched up, but her eyes were bloodshot. She carried the rigid posture of a woman served a final ultimatum. Julian walked beside her. Silent, she took the microphone. For the third time, the room fell into a heavy judicial silence. "I owe someone an apology," she said, her voice thin. She scanned the crowd for an exit, but there was none. "Mayor, I should not have introduced you the way I did." "I am sorry." She stopped. The air turned icy. Evelyn spoke from her seat, sharp and cold, and the lies about my mental health. Elena froze. "I told the Hearts things that were not true. I am sorry for that too." The words felt small, not enough, but all I would get. I stayed put. Forgiveness takes time. I caught her eye and nodded. Julian grabbed the mic. Maya, we owe you everything and we will make it right. Elena stood by her new husband, forced to watch her own wedding narrative crumble. She had no control. She apologized using the same microphone meant to ruin me. I did not need her sorry. I needed her to hear it. The night felt different now. The vibe had shifted. Quieter, people whispered. Arthur found me in the garden, sitting on a bench near the magnolias. The wedding decor was gone, just grass and lanterns. He sat down and pulled a beat-up leather wallet from his coat. He unfolded a yellowed, creased piece of paper, my medical records. The note simply said, Nurses Vance. He kept my name in his wallet for years. He never knew my face, but he knew my name saved him. The paper was frayed, the ink nearly gone. He held on to it all that time. When that woman dismissed me as just a nurse, he nearly exploded. I asked him why he cared. He looked at me like he finally found his life's mission. Because nobody gets to belittle my savior. He handed me a crisp business card, the Sterling Foundation. He promised the scholarship was real. Call Monday. I took the card, fingers trembling, finally feeling the weight of those 3 years. Monday at 9, the office rang. A grant officer handled the details. $200,000 for my trauma nursing degree, all costs covered. The legal papers cleared in 2 weeks. My name was finally spelled correctly. I signed them at the kitchen table before my shift. My sister and her husband started therapy. My dad called saying the sellers blocked their new home purchase until they saved the marriage. Her friends vanished. People stopped answering. Her online fame cratered. The gossip died out. Then a note from my dad on yellow paper, messy, regretful. He wrote about everything he never said at my graduation, about every dinner where he let them belittle me. He was sorry. I tucked it away, no reply. Some apologies are just white noise. The mistress disappeared. Once there was nothing left to gain, she was gone. My sister S' apology was cheap. The real cost hit when the crowd left. Back at the hospital on Monday, nobody cared about status. A labourer arrived with a severe injury. A teen overdosed. We saved a grandmother in room 4. Dr. Grant caught me in the hall, glasses perched on her head. She mentioned Mark Holden had called again. He wanted to thank the staff, specifically naming me. She looked me in the eye and called me a hero. I just said, I am a nurse, that is enough. Dr. Grant gave a rare, genuine smile. I never bragged about the credit. My work stays where it matters in the medical charts, but inside everything felt different. I touched my mother's pearls in the mirror. They used to represent loss. Now they were a cord connecting every version of me, the girl who lost her mom, the teen lost in a new home, the woman saving lives. I never planned this. I just did my job. The real justice wasn't Mark's praise. It was 20 years of becoming someone my sister could never break. True power is quiet. It is those long minutes in the dark when nobody watches. If you are trapped in a family that treats your life like a joke, hear this. You are not their opinion. You are what you do when the world stops watching. Last week, I got a heavy envelope from Mark, a formal invite, a seat with my name, spelled right. For the first time, I was not an afterthought. I pinned the card to my fridge, right next to my mom's photo. She is laughing there, pearls catching the light. I do not know if my dad or my sister will ever change, but I am done waiting. This morning, I clipped my badge on Clara Hayes, registered nurse. I put on my Mother S pearls and drove to the clinic. 3 patient files waited before I could even pour my coffee. My mom always said helping others brings the right people to you. She was right. I am Clara Hayes, a nurse, and that is the most powerful thing I have ever been. If this story moved you, I have to ask, do people like her really change? Tell me in the comments. Change or just hide? I read every reply. If this moved you, please like the video. It helps others find it. Check the description for more stories like this. Thanks for listening, take care, and remember, you are more than what they call you. Thanks for joining the channel. If this stayed with you, hit subscribe and share because every story matters.